Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who's dialing in today. We are excited to be here to dig into a topic that ignites a lot of passion, the imbalance of gender at the leadership level. And that is specifically in the executive and board roles of today's business economy. But more than just discussing those challenges that exist, we're here to dive deep into some long-standing causes between certain inequalities and the actions that we can all take to change the narrative. At the center of today's discussion is a national research study that we at Wednesday Women conducted in partnership with Kickstand and launched just last week, focused on this topic. I'm Melissa Moody, CEO at Matcha and co-founder of Wednesday Women, and I'm joined here today by some outstanding women leaders who bring a lot of insight into this particular discussion. Nycole Walsh is currently head of digital revenue operations and previously head of digital services and research at Kickstand. Kickstand is the global tech PR firm that conducted this research and a lot of other groundbreaking work. She is the woman we have to thank for this data that we're about to dive into today with the Balancing the Boardroom study. Cynthia Barnes is also here with us, a respected Salesforce influencer and 3 times author with a passion for diversity, inclusion, and women's leadership that has made her a top voice on LinkedIn. If you're not following her, you better be. She's a force for resilience, empowerment, and groundbreaking leadership, who was actually the first Black woman to headline a national sales conference. Her achievements, including founding the National Association of Women Sales Professionals, prove the power of resilience and the impact of one person's drive to create a more inclusive world. Sophie Buonassisi is the VP of Marketing at GTMFund, an early-stage venture fund that invests in up-and-coming B2B SaaS companies. She is also the driving force of GTMNow, the media brand of GTMFund, which is excellent at sharing insight and advice on go-to-market based on the hundreds of portfolio companies and the expertise of more than 350 executive operator lending partners that back GTMFund. Ladies, thank you all for being here today. If you haven't already, listeners, and those of us who are joining us on LinkedIn, for those of you who are joining us today, we would love to see your names and your roles and your locations in the chat or comment section. Questions also throughout the discussion can be put into the chat for Q&A, and we will have an open Q&A session at the end of the panel. So let's get started. We're going to start by grounding everyone who's listening with us today in the why and the how of this data. It's an incredible report available both on Kickstand and Wednesday Women for anyone to download. But if you haven't read it, or if you really want to know how it came about, we're going to start with Nycole, who's going to tell us a bit about the context, the why we decided to create this report, and how it was conducted, how it came to be. Nycole?
Thank you so much, Melissa. Yes, so Kickstand is a woman-founded agency, and naturally, all of us there are very passionate about the topic of making the workplace more hospitable to women. So once we partnered with Wednesday Women, the topic was really very easy to arrive at. In trying to figure out what all we wanted to cover under the topic, though, it was really important to me to figure out other factors aside from women's greater share of family responsibility. I feel that's usually the main focus of a study like this. It's something very easy to slap a policy or a Band-Aid on. So it's a really nice thing to point to and say, this is the problem. And not to understate the importance of benefits that address this, but we don't see representation in leadership equalize for women without children. So it's clear that there are other factors at work, and I really wanted to pull those out into the light. I think working into the corporate landscape for any measure of time at all, you see the things that many of us are taught in order to move through the world as women are just very detrimental behaviors in the workplace. We're less likely to speak up. We're less likely to take credit for our work. We're less likely to assert ourselves and our expertise in the way that you need to be heard in a room of big personalities. So I wanted to dig into where this starts and the ways that it's reinforced over a lifetime. So to get the data, we surveyed 622 people in leadership roles that was defined as working at manager level or above. Around 600 is the standard sample that we use at Kickstand to get to a 4% margin of error at 95% confidence level, which is kind of our gold standard. The survey was pre-targeted and we conducted online in February of this year. And we also kept our focus to those who conduct the majority of their work using a computer so that we could filter out any industries that were not quite as relevant to our audiences.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you take a peek at the report, it is chock full of data points. To your point, it wasn't just about looking into one arena. There are multiple sections of the report with a lot of data. I would love, as a starting point, to do a little bit of an around the horn and ask each of us here to share either a data point or a specific part of the research that resonated most for us. Sophie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, happy to do so. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the fantastic research report from Wednesday Women and Kickstand. Like you said, Melissa, framed it well. It is chock full of data. So it's hard to find part of it that doesn't resonate. But if I were to really drill in and pick one area, it is coming from my experience of, fortunately, being in roles where diversity is valued in all aspects. So gender, geographic location, racial, all these different aspects of diversity, and being able to see that impact firsthand really made the data point around the impact of diversity stand out. So action toward gender equity really having a profound and positive impact on not only, one aspect, but really a company's image, innovation, and engagement. So a few of those data points, for example, is 86% of women and 70% of men said they would be more likely to accept a role at a company if there was no gender disparity evident on the leadership team. So these kind of astounding statistics really shows that diverse leadership not only enhances a company's appeal as an inclusive and fair workplace, but also really improves the ability to attract top talent. Same thing with innovation, 84% of women and 67% of men associated visible gender equity efforts with innovation. And similar data points for results. So these types of points really stood out for me personally, just having experienced them in a personal way, but not having the data to actually back it. So being able to really connect and merge those together.
And having those points of data, which might start as perception, but really translate into action for companies, for events, things that it actually impacts the bottom line for the folks that are in charge of these. Wonderfully put.
Exactly. And particularly now as events are picking up incredibly, just 82% of women and 57% of men said they were more likely to attend conferences if women are more represented on speaker rosters and so forth. So really considering these data points and planning events and so forth really intentionally.
No longer just a nice to have, right? Cynthia, how about you? What resonated specifically for you?
First of all, I love data because, as they say, data will set you free and the data never lie. Having reports like this and with the granularity and specificity of this report, it allows us to say things like, women, if you're not looking at a company, and if you're looking at a company and it does not have the representation, the diversity that you're looking for, know for a fact that there are companies out there that do. So as they say, go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated, because the fact remains that in 2024, with all of the resources that are available, if a leadership team, if a board of directors, if insert blank, whatever is homogeneous, i.e. it all looks the same, in 2024, it's by design. So if it is that way, you've got options. Go someplace else. Unless you want to be that trailblazer, knowing that you're going to get your knees and elbows bloody, know what you're up against. But there are companies out there who are going to welcome you, who embrace diversity and know that it is a must-have, not just a nice-to-have.
So lovely to think about that. I mean, even a generation ago, everybody had to be trailblazers. We now live in a time where you can go where it's already celebrated, where someone has blazed the trail, and simply by doubling down and, what is that? Put your money where your mouth is, right? Like, vote for those companies, put yourself and put your great talents to work at those companies that have already validated. That's truly powerful. What a good it's very actionable too. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm putting that one in my own list of to-do items. Nycole, how about you? You were the one who brought all this data to light in the first place. Is it like asking you to pick your favorite child to tell us your favorite data point?
It's so much like that. It's funny that you teed me up that way, because exactly what I was going to say was like, I'm in a very unique position here. I pulled so much of this storyline from my own experiences, from the experiences of women that I know and that I spoke to. So it would definitely be easier to choose a piece of the research that does not resonate personally. But If I had to choose my favorite child, I would probably say the piece of this research that hit the home most for me was the societal emphasis on girls moving through the world being sweet or agreeable. I was mind blown to learn that over half of men have never, ever, ever been told that they should smile more. Can you even imagine? I was told to smile more within the last couple of weeks. I've had people tell me this in all kinds of ways, under the guise of being friendly, as a means of being menacing, as professional advice. I also found it very striking that women were fully twice as likely as men to say that their childhood messaging encouraged them to be submissive. I think seeing sort of the cold, hard data on this really drives home a lot of what I have seen anecdotally, which is that women have this incredible hurdle of overcoming deep-rooted messaging about what it means to be a good woman in the world, just so they can speak up and be heard. This obviously has really significant implications for the workplace, which we're here to talk about primarily today. But as a woman now with 40 years behind me and a daughter of my own, I think what keeps me up at night about this is not just the disadvantage that it puts us at, but the actual danger it puts us in, to feel like sweetness is what we owe the world. It's such a pervasive trait among women in our society that more than one serial criminal has used it as a way to claim victims. So I think my primary takeaway, or my favorite child, I guess, is I want to see a world in which women are not willing to literally endanger themselves to maintain this expectation of sweetness.
Truly powerful. And I know as a mom, I think it also echoes, extra deep for ourselves, and then also for the children that we are raising, boys and girls, of course. Let's take that and dive a little bit more in, because one of the first main sections of the report is about the impact of childhood messaging on long-term success. As you pointed out, the differences by gender for certain points especially were quite notable. For example, men were 267 times more likely to say that they were taught to be brave, and they were 62% more likely to be encouraged to be confident. On the other side of that spectrum, women were 100% more likely to be quiet, encouraged to be quiet, and 48% more likely to be agreeable. Confident and brave, agreeable and quiet. You are all very powerful, confident women sitting here today. I would like to know, did you see yourself in any of this childhood messaging statistics, or did you receive a different type of messaging growing up? I'll share my own thoughts, but I want to hear yours first. Cynthia, would you mind starting us off with this, your take on that?
I did not grow up in a traditional household, if you will. My father is ex-military. He's a former Air Force sergeant, or a retired Air Force sergeant. So in our home, it was very non-traditional. It was one of those homes where if the trash needed to be taken out, whoever's handiest takes it out. So we didn't have traditional gender roles in our home. I also grew up in a sundown town. And for those of you who don't know what sundown towns are, they are traditionally segregated towns where they have signs on the outskirts of town as you enter the town that say, no blacks out or enter inward, no blacks out past sundown. So if you ever watch those old Westerns, they would say, don't let the sun go down on you in my town. So that's how I grew up. So those traditional gender norms of being quiet and submissive didn't really apply to a young Black girl in Greentown, Indiana, because I was anything but a traditional little girl. I had to speak up for myself every single day when someone called me a name that was not something that I wanted to identify with. If I was submissive or I accepted what they called me, my parents knew that I would start to identify with what they called me. So they taught me to speak up and speak out. At the risk of being unliked, my self-esteem was worth more than their feelings. And I took that with me throughout life, knowing that my self-esteem superseded your hurt ego, your hurt feelings, or your hurt opinion of me, because you are going to be gone and I still got to live with me.
So truly powerful to hear the early achievement of self-esteem over what people want to hear coming from those kind of converging influences on your young life, Cynthia. And for those of you who don't know yet, Cynthia has an amazing TED Talk. But one of the phrases that still runs through my head every day is the hashtag that is associated with it, which is own your awesome. And I'm sure we're going to dig into that, if not in the questions, at least in the Q&A after. But I can already feel that early empowerment to own your awesome. I'm really curious to hear if we're echoing that through the other women on the call here. Nycole, from your perspective, did you feel some of that early childhood messaging that was calm and quiet and agreeable, or did you have some of this kind of early empowerment that Cynthia is talking about?
I think I had an interesting mix personally, because my husband always makes fun of me. He always says one of the things that attracted him to me was my confidence, and he says like my confidence is a beast. It's its own beast, really. Like I am a very confident person. I was raised with a mother specifically who boosted me up every chance she got, like aggressively boosted me up, almost to the point of like it was almost unrealistic. Like you can do anything. And I mean anything. If I had told her that I didn't believe it, she would not hear it at all. At the same time, as I was receiving that messaging at home, that like you can do anything messaging, I also was raised in the South. So I think when I talk about this messaging that with an emphasis on sweetness, that was very much a part of my upbringing and the fabric of the communities that I was raised in. I cannot tell you the number of times that I have heard the phrase, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. So much so that I remember when I was writing this ebook, I wanted to make one of the section titles like how to catch flies. And Leslie Greenwood had to tell me that's not really as self-explanatory as you think. So I think, and you know, we also, I had a stepdad who moved in when I was in elementary school, late elementary school, who, like you said, Cynthia, he was a military man, and he had some very definite ideas about what was and was not ladylike, and it ran headfirst against what I had been taught my whole life by my mother. So all of this to say, I had a lot of messages coming at me from every which way, and I think the end result of that has really been that I once heard somebody say, you know, the voice that goes off in your head first when somebody makes a comment to you is like what you were taught. And the second voice that corrects that voice is the voice of who you really are. And I think the first voice that sounds off in my head is sometimes that voice that tells me I'm less than, or I, you know, have a certain place in society that doesn't match with what I know to be what I can actually do. So that second voice is the one that I try to listen to.
Take notes on that one, everyone. Sophie, I'd love to hear from you too. I think this is really pulling out. This is special to me because we've taken something that's a research report, but in coming here together, we're really going into these unique experiences that everyone has and layering that on. Sophie, why don't you share with us a little bit to your same, that reflection on the childhood messaging impact?
Definitely. And that really is the unique part of this topic too, is that it's pervasive through your whole life. It starts in childhood, it continues on throughout your career and the rest of your life. And my background in childhood messaging is a little bit more similar to Nycole yourselves, where it was quite mixed. So there were aspects of agreeableness and sweetness that were highly emphasized and encouraged both verbally and non-verbally in terms of a less confrontational environment, and being pushed towards not necessarily speaking up your opinion. However, one of the things that I am forever grateful for and incredibly fortunate to have had was a very strong foundation around the nuances of messaging. And it's something, maybe I should have mentioned it earlier, is the part that resonated most for me, that I am extremely bullish on, is the importance of being aware of the nuances of messaging to children and at such a young age. So, for example, myself, I was fortunate to receive the messaging of you can do anything. And Nycole, I think you quoted that also. And there's a big difference between getting that messaging and getting messaging that is around you're a girl, but you can do anything, or you can keep up with the boys. And those subtleties, even though it is from an encouraging perspective, actually does manifest and resonate and create an impact. And so for myself, having received the messaging of you can do anything without any mention of gender is what created the strong foundation and at that formative age. And it's what carries through. And so as you go through life and you have these experiences where perhaps you're faced with challenges, and I've been faced with those types of challenges, it's really that foundation that creates the strength and the fallback of being able to continue forward and kind of have no problem to understand and listen to that deeper sense and rooted sense of identity and confidence, and understand, similar to what Cynthia said, that it's important to actually go where you're celebrated, not tolerated, and be able to recognize the nuances of those situations, similarly to the messaging that you received as a child.
Truly powerful. And I love that extra bit you called out, Sophie, about layering on the comparison statement, right? It actually makes me think of that Super Bowl campaign, the Like a Girl. Do you remember that one? Where they said, do it,
Yeah.
you throw like a girl. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to throw like a girl because that's exactly how I want to throw. And it's removing that like a girl as a comparison, but you can do it. No, just start from the base.
That's such a good point. Oh, sorry to run over you, Melissa, but I just have to sort of double tap that, because I think it's a really powerful thing to be taught, like, that it's a bad thing to be a woman. I think this is something, that I unfortunately, very sadly, bought into for way longer than I would like to admit in my own youth, was like this belief that when I was told that I'm not like other women, that that's somehow a good thing. Or like, when you talked about like a girl, like it's supposed to be a bad thing. And I think a lot of the messaging that you received, even as somebody who thought, I thought I was counterculture, growing up, and that I was a feminist at the time, that I was really espousing a lot of very anti-feminist ideas about, us as a secondary gender.
Mm-hmm. There's one of my best friends is a pediatrician, and she always speaks about how the boys actually have the broken chromosome, Nycole. So don't worry. Let's take this one step further. I think it's obviously the childhood messaging has had a deep, we've been able to reflect on our own experiences in light of the childhood messaging. I would love to ask for each of you, and we'll do another kind of around the horn, was there something in the data of the report that surprised you? And maybe you could share, either a specific data point or a point that was made with our audience today. Nycole, let's start this one out with you, since again, you were deep in the weeds and you probably weren't surprised by a lot of it. What was something that actually surprised you in the data?
It's funny that you say that, because I think I might be a little bit of a starry-eyed optimist. The data did surprise me. I actually did a LinkedIn post, a week or so back, with a screenshot of when we were working in the storyline. I had made a comment around one of the data points around employer support. I think what I wrote was something like, I'm like maybe, 40, 60 on this panning out, thinking like it was not going to pan out. I thought we had made more progress than that. I was like, but it would be crazy if it did, if we saw some disparity in support here. What we got back there was like 208% more likely, women were more likely to say that their employer doesn't support their efforts to go and speak at conferences. So there were many pieces of the data that were pretty starkly divergent from what I personally expected. I think another piece that really sticks out to me, and it's a little bit discouraging, is like in survey research, there's a barrier to getting people to tell on themselves. Like, you have to sort of put up a lot of disclaimers. If you want people to tell on themselves, to tell on their employers, you have to really put in a lot of privacy statements and say, this data is not going to be shared, you cannot be identified. And even then, people, when they self-report, they tend to do it through a little bit more of a rosy lens. So with all of that in mind, we got a nice majority of men who said that they cared deeply enough about equal representation that they would be more likely to accept a role at a company that didn't have any evident gender disparity on the leadership team. Women were still 23% more likely to say that, which I think ties to a bigger problem that I see in society that's not just about gender disparities. It's about caring about things before they affect you personally. This is something, if we have an issue that's grossly impacting half of the population and 30% of the other half doesn't think that it matters, how are we ever going to fix it? Or like when we asked, do you associate visible gender equity efforts with innovation? Fully a third of men said no. It was really hard for me to wrap my mind around that. If we can solve a problem that's keeping top talent out of the workforce in mass, that is innovation to me. That makes a huge difference in our work and our lives. So to me, I think this is the set of stats that has taken up maybe the most resonance in my head since doing this study, is that if we can get enough people to care about a problem, the momentum usually takes care of the rest. But how do we get enough momentum here with these kinds of numbers?
I'd love to actually, before we move on, I'd love to see if Cynthia or Sophie wants to respond to that. I think that's very powerful. We may never convince, 100%. And this is across so many issues in our world, right? So what should we seek to do in terms of forward progress, given that there's always going to be a group who doesn't see it as a problem? Any thoughts? Yeah, Cynthia.
There's an old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Trying to convince someone, be it man, woman, my Rottweiler, to do something they don't want to do is almost impossible. We have to make the issue compelling. And even though we may make the issue compelling, there are still going to be people who don't want to. And that's okay. We ran a study and found that 11 women have an 11% higher average of closing than their male counterparts. I took that data, empirical data, and took it to sales leaders and said, here is your data that says you should hire more women. Would you believe that 75% of the sales leaders that I approached with that data, saying 11% more, still said, I'm not hiring more women, even with the data? There are going to be some people who do not want change, and that's okay. It goes back to rock with people who rock with you, right? Some things we just can't change.
Yep.
And that's okay. But if enough of us get together, we can affect the change that we want to see in the areas that we want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Will we be able to affect the change in the whole world? Maybe, maybe not. But we've got to choose our battles, or else we'll go crazy.
That strikes a very deep chord with me, Cynthia. I think I've always taken a what some might call an overly optimistic approach to a lot of, on a variety of places, different spots where there is inequality, and I've never personally had the mindset of I'm going to convince the people that don't want to be convinced. I've been probably pretty quick to be on your side, which is like, all right, good luck to them. I'm going to go put my effort where it can really make the change. But I think it's wonderful to hear, especially in such a tangible example of that sales stat, direct to their bottom line, direct to their hiring principles, and still there are reasons that for which may remain unknown that they retain. Just because I want to come back to this, actually, Cynthia, why don't we have you follow up on this? When we talked about parts of the data that you were surprised by, was there anywhere else in the data that really kind of surprised you or made you step back? Because you've actually seen a lot of this. It was not surprising to you. So was there anything that actually made you blink and be a bit surprised?
There were two parts that the part about women saying their employer was not supportive of them building their personal brand. And then the other one that said their employer was not supportive of them seeking or obtaining professional development. That did not surprise me. What did surprise me was what I thought afterward was, why would you ask them to support you? That's the question I wanted to know. Because you are responsible for your personal brand. Yes, it will elevate the company, but I would go into a situation saying, you know what, I don't expect them to support me getting professional development, because the lens through which I view things, maybe I'm jaded, but I expect my employer to pay me, and that's it. I expect them maybe I've been through the school of hard knocks, and maybe I've been through too many employers who just say, you know what, here's a check and that's it, and don't invest in me. I've had to invest in myself. And maybe that's the world I live in. But that did not surprise me that so few women get professional development from their employers. What surprised me was the fact that I think they were surprised.
Actually, Sophie, I'm going to come to you to ask what surprised you too. But before, I'd love to hear your response to that, because you see a lot of companies in your role at GTM Fund. You see a lot of companies, especially those early stage growth companies. Is there an expectation of these companies that they should be doing this when maybe it's not entirely on them to do, or maybe it's something that we just have very high expectations now that have changed in the last 10 years for what companies are responsible for? Love to hear your take on that.
I love the space and those that involve in the space of early stage, because it's an interesting challenge where there is just no capacity for someone to take responsibility for your career, nor should they, as Cynthia expressed. And that's a firm belief I have too. Any gender, you are responsible for your own growth, personally and professionally. And there will be people that support you and facilitate that growth, but ultimately you are the owner. And what we see is those that engage in early stage companies are those that tend to gravitate towards that belief, simply because the early stage companies don't have the capacity to create those programs for growth. They'll facilitate, certainly, and provide the tools and provide the liberty, but it's a lot more of, here are the keys, and I'm going to empower you to run the keys. And part of that is your personal growth. Part of that is in this role itself. But what we see is there's a lot of self-starters, a lot of people that take that professional growth into their own hands at all of these early stage companies that we work with.
That's truly powerful. Sophie, I know we skipped over your point about anything that surprised you in the data. Do you want to circle back to that? Was there anything that stood out to you around things that surprised you from the data?
We can probably pass over that one, because mine was much more related to a point that Nycole expressed extremely well, just around the percentages of childhood messaging. So I think it's a great place to shift forward.
Which actually brings me to a bit of my next question, which is, we talked about our personal take on the impact of childhood messaging. I'd love to go a little bit more into maybe our own experience with not only obviously the childhood messaging, but actually if we think about, to your point, Sophie, of how growth stage companies have to support this journey, have to support men and women in their professional journey. I'd love to hear from each of you around your own understanding and how societal expectations have kind of shaped your own professional journey based on the companies you've been a part of or the careers that we've followed. So I know we asked each of you to reflect on this a little bit earlier. Sophie, maybe you'd like to start with that one.
Absolutely. Well, similar to the childhood messaging that we mentioned, I think personally, I was very fortunate to have the childhood messaging that was, you can do anything, and did not mention gender in any way. So that really positioned me in a place professionally that, frankly, I didn't consider it. I thought, I'm just as capable as any other human, regardless of anyone's gender. And so that's always the mentality that I went into situations with. And then in situations, you face mixed messaging, you face situations where perhaps that is not the case, but you have that strong foundation to keep growing. And so I'm currently at my second consecutive company where there's exactly 4 executives, and 3 of them are male, and I'm the only female. Well, we actually just hired a phenomenal female executive, but up until that point was the case. So second consecutive company, and I will say it's extremely empowering. And that's part of being able to recognize those nuances and go where you are celebrated, not tolerated, is understanding who are the people in general who are going to empower you as an individual. And fortunately, I've been a part of that. So a past company, for example, we had a remote culture. We had tons of, various geographic boundaries setting us forth. And it was this beautiful, cohesive environment where everyone was extremely empowering. And similarly now at GTM Fund, everyone is extremely empowering. both of building professional brands, of building personal brands, everything along the way. And so for me, that childhood messaging was really formative to the professional growth that I was able to go through, because always approaching it with that lens of who is the best human for this, and always empowering the people around you and being conscious of all of the different nuances and empowering people and trying to create greater diversity, but really personally approaching it as feeling capable of accomplishing anything. So I think a good takeaway for that would be to and just always have confidence in yourself and understand if it is not the right environment for you, there are other environments. There are other people, and it's not worth your energy trying to change other people's behavior, because it's challenging. There's a lot of deep-rooted beliefs in people's behaviors. So if you can understand where you want to be and what resonates with you personally, that's the right place to go and to grow. And there's constant challenges. I would say continuously growing. There are societal pressures, just around what it means to be a good wife. And I think I hear these societal pressures more now, actually, as an adult, and understanding, well, I'm a quite career-oriented person myself. And that stems from a place of, I view work as a vehicle for impact. And so I take great pride in the work that I do, as it aligns deeply with my purpose of creating impact in certain areas. And so for me, that's a non-negotiable. And I'm always kind of feeling the constant pressures of, different societal roles for females. And it's something that I'm just constantly working on. I find surrounding myself by very empowering and exemplary women, such as yourselves and others, and just constantly have a
Did we lose Sophie a little bit?
hopefully not.
I think you're back.
He's back.
Okay.
We just lost
Sorry
you at the
if I cut
very
off
end.
there.
No, we just lost you at the very end. I wanted to call out one thing that you spoke to, I think is very, very important, which is you can actually find that empowering, place that lets you fulfill yourself. And you might be the only woman with 3 men, because I'd love to kind of throw a little hot take in there. Some of the biggest allies and supporters in me being confident in my life have all been men. And I've actually had some what I might qualify as some damaging relationships that were actually perpetrated by females in executive boards. So I think it's very important that we don't distinguish what we're saying as building the better side of where we want to be. That's not just on women, and it's not just on men, right? Like it really, you have to look at these perceptions also across gender lines in who is really building the way that you want to build and who you want to double down with, right?
That's a great call out, Melissa.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hot take. Sometimes I throw it out there. I don't know, Cynthia, do you need to jump in on that one? Because I feel like that's something that we've chatted about before. Leslie and I have deeply, and I wonder if you and Leslie have as well, around sometimes the biggest strongholds in making this research move toward the better, toward greater equality, have actually been men on the side of the champions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I do have thoughts, plenty of thoughts. So I'll address the allyship of our male counterparts first.
Yeah.
Allyship is crucial because a lot of times men are in places that we cannot enter for one reason or another. It's important for our male allies to remember, though, being an ally does not mean walking ahead of us. It means walking beside us. And being a partner, not necessarily walking ahead of us and leading us, because when you do that, we are in your shadow and we cannot be seen. So as our allies, please remember that there's power in walking beside us and guiding us, but not leading us so that we are overshadowed. The other point I wanted to mention was, when being a sales leader, I wanted to become the type of sales leader that I needed when I was growing up, because I never saw anyone who looked like me. Growing up in Greentown, Indiana, I didn't know any Blacks except the Cosbys. And I said, I didn't want to be the only one, but I was. In every single sales role, I was the only Black and I was the only Black woman. But I knew from a very young age that I would have to do everything twice as good to be half as recognized, because that's just the way it was. It wasn't good, bad, or indifferent. That's just the way it was. And to this day, I find that there are certain things that I have to do one step above excellent when someone else who doesn't look like me doesn't have to. And I'm not saying that to say, have a woe is me. It's just the reality of my life and those who look like me. Everyone has challenges. Those are mine. That being said, my challenges have also made me very empathetic, because I can't remove my gender or my race. I can't, when I get home, I can't take it off and hang it in the closet. It sticks with me every single day. So the things that can cause people to view me in a lesser light, if that's what they choose to do, they stick with me every single day, 24/7, 365. So when you look at someone, when I look at someone, we have to realize that they are fighting a battle that we may not know anything about. There are people out there who will never know what it's like to be a Black woman in corporate America, in sales, in tech. There are people who will not know what it's like to be a Black man stopped by the police and fear for your life. I don't know, because I'm not a Black man. But if we can all remember that the other person that we are on the phone with, across the Zoom with, is fighting a battle that we don't know anything about, and raise our level of empathy and kindness, I think the world would be a better place. So when we talk about gender, equity, inclusion, diversity, yes, the numbers speak for themselves. Yes, we should do the right thing for the numbers' sake. But more importantly, because we're all part of the human race. Part of the human race. And that's all I got to say.
No, it's funny how, this is just a little study that we ran, about this little topic, but it has these massive, massive implications on a philosophical level. So I'm very glad you brought us there. And I think you brought up one extra point that I'll bring back, which I'm actually really interested to hear from Sophie as well in this, which is there are certain industries, if we look at the business lens of where we're operating, there are certain industries that probably come with a lot of baggage. Cynthia, I think we could talk all day about sales, and you've kind of brought that up. We will go more into that too. But I'm going to say also investing and financial, access to financial resources is a really hot topic right now. Sophie, can you, take a little bit of that and run? You see the world of investing, the world of VC, and how some of this inequity is being challenged in that industry. I'd love to hear a bit on that topic.
Definitely. And I will say we are still seeing, from a deal flow perspective, more male founders. Mm-hmm. So inevitably a portfolio is typically representative of the ratio of deals that you see. Mm-hmm. So there is still that representation, but there's really twofold approach to this. One is, how can you understand and support female founders? Mm-hmm. And then the other is from the investment standpoint. So advice to founders, advice to investors, if you will. And from the investing perspective is really, the data speaks for itself. We've gone over the data of how team performance is highly correlated with diversity. So understanding and seeking out founders that are either or value diversity as you go through that deal flow process is a really smart business strategy. Typically, we invest pre-seed to Series A. Typically, it's a very early stage investment. And so you're really making a bet on the person, and there isn't a great large leadership team involved yet. So it's namely based on that person. You can understand how that person values people business decisions, diversity, and really value those aspects of the founder when assessing a deal would be that advice from the investment standpoint. To founders, not underestimating the power of community and peer support, because that is something that we've seen a tremendous impact. We're very fortunate to have really, really wonderful and brilliant women leaders and founders and CEOs in the portfolio. So Alexa Grable from Pocus, for example, Lena Joshi from Close Factor, May Habib from Writer. And one of the kind of unique aspects of GTMFund is we have a very community forward environment. So capital essentially is becoming a commodity, similar to technology. The moats are declining. So we call it a capital plus model of what are you providing beyond capital? And one of those things for us is community. So for example, all of our founders have a Slack channel together. So it facilitates this type of community and connection, not only between our female founders, but actual allies too. So we talked about allies. It enables everybody to have greater visibility to these strong, incredible female founders and become allies and walk beside them, not in front of them. So that community is something that elevates. So for founders is really considering what environment am I moving into? Is it going to help facilitate those connections and provide allies and people that will walk beside me? But overall, it's an area that we are continuously seeing strides in. There is always, just like every other environment and vertical, we talked about sales and marketing, there's always a ton of room for improvement. But fortunately, we've seen a ton of progress. And it's also one that from a direct involvement of our fund, we are very fortunate to have strong female founders and investment partners. One of our largest investors actually is a full female team of executives. So fortunately, they came out here. We were able to meet them in person and just amazing people. So it's this dynamic where, again, it's not something that is extremely evident, because when you look around, there is so much in terms of incredible leaders across all genders. But when you actually crunch the numbers, just like this report, and that's why we're having this conversation today, is it is still shocking. There is so much room for improvement when you actually crunch the numbers and look across the kind of female founder support, the investment side. There's a lot of room for growth, and we'll keep working towards that.
This is something that, as most of you know, Wednesday Women was really founded on this idea that we need to actually see those examples, right? We need to see those female founders who are already out there, so that it kind of primes the pump and creates that more larger influx of female founders who put themselves into deal flow, who say, I'm ready for investment. I want to bring it back to a really interesting data point that actually I think was my big surprising one or eye-opening one. I'd love to actually see this the next time we run the report, Nycole. I'd love to see the same stat for founders and deal flow and investment searchers, but the generational difference around Gen Z leaders. So there was a bullet point in the report that said Gen Z was 14% more likely than their older cohorts to see themselves in the C-suite, and they were 36% more likely to want a spot on a board. So it's showing they're hungry for it, right? I'd really love to see if that same demand and hunger is kind of growing at the younger cohort age group in the founder space, maybe even in sales. I think we could look at it almost across any industry and see, is there hunger to be in those executive roles across the board? Nycole, do you want to speak a little bit to that data point? Because I think there was an interesting follow-on stat to that desire to be at the executive level.
Yes, the follow-up stat to that was that they were, I believe, some 45% less likely than average to believe that it would be achievable to do so within their current organization. So while I think we see, and I would love to also, the thing about running a research study is that it always opens up more questions than it answers. And so it always like, next time I would love to find out this, but next time I would love to find out a little bit more about how much a change, perhaps a shift in messaging, has affected Gen Z. And that's why we're seeing this increase in confidence. I would also love to ask more from Gen Z about how we can support those ambitions, because it seems evident to me from that follow-up data point that there's there's a mismatch, right, between their ambition and what they feel their workplace is willing to nurture.
Yeah, truly. I think let's spin this. I want to take this one step further and make it, as we're getting a little bit toward the end of our time, take that idea of what's possible and turn it into what we're seeing is actually working and or what we think is actionable. So I'd love to ask this group, for those who are ready, for those who are hungry, for those who are really wanting to feed this desire to have women, especially of the Gen Zs who want to be on the C-suite. What are the steps that we can take? What are some of those actionable individual things that we can even do to help foster that environment, in the next year, 5 years ahead? A couple of those points that we heard earlier around companies are more appealing to, it was 80 something percent of women and 70% of men would want to work at a company where this is true. How do we get there? Let's with about 10 minutes left here, what are the really tactical things that either a company or, let's say, an individual, I'll give you a choice, could and should be doing right now to move us one step further? Cynthia, would you like to start this one off?
Yes. A couple of years ago, I ran a roundtable discussion with some Fortune 500 revenue leaders. And I asked them, if an individual contributor who happens to be male wants to ascend to sales leadership, what would you coach him on? And they said things like P&L, forecasting, the number side of the business. And then I flipped it around and I said, if a female individual contributor wants to ascend to sales leadership, what would you coach her on? And they said things like emotional intelligence, relationship building, soft skills, they said. And so I asked, why the discrepancy? And they looked around, they shrugged, and they said, well, that's the way we've always done it. So for companies looking to have women in leadership positions, we must make sure that the training is equitable and equal. Equal means that the same training is available for everyone. Equitable means that if a subset group of your population needs something extra to level the playing field, then we offer it to them. So if you come over to my home and I'm making meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans, but your spouse is vegan, equality says, and I'm offering everyone the same meal, but your spouse is vegan, equity says that I'm going to offer them a vegan meal because that's what they need to thrive. So embrace equality and equity. On the individual side, if you are a woman wanting to ascend to leadership, ask questions, demand transparency, make sure you are paid the same as your male counterparts. Make sure that your training is the same as your male counterparts. I can't tell you how many times the happy hours on the sales teams are excluding women because they have home duties that take them or prevent them from going to the happy hour. What happens at happy hours? Yeah, you drink, but there's all types of coaching that goes on between the managers and the sales reps. Those who can't attend for whatever reason cannot get that coaching. So those who attend get more coaching and they advance more. Let's make it equitable. Let's level that playing field. So it's up to us to demand it, and it's up to leadership to make it accessible.
And to circle back to your earlier point, if it's not happening, go where it is, right?
Right.
Right. Okay, who's next? Nycole, do you want to talk about something that either people or companies can and should do right today? What are we doing that's actionable?
I love that you gave those too, because those are sort of the two buckets right there. There's employer action and then there's individual action. I think, when we asked this question in the survey about what employers could do to most effectively combat this problem, we put some really sexy choices in there for things that sounded very cool. I was surprised a little bit that they didn't seem as sexy to our respondents. Really, what the answers came back to were just the basics of keeping a flexible work environment, making sure that you're investing in your employees equally. Another big one was setting a good example in senior leadership. Both men and females in senior leadership need to be setting a good example. If you want to have a culture where work-life balance is the norm, which you should, because, if you know me at all, you've probably heard me give my RTO mandates are anti-feminist soapbox speech. There is no shortage of data to show that women are still carrying an uneven amount of the household labor on a statistical level. So when there's inflexibility in the workplace, statistically, who's going to pay for that? Right? I think it comes down to the employer to address these problems individually. I think what the best thing that we can all do is a really honest self-inventory to confront our internalized bias so that we can be that second voice for ourselves and course correct when we've internalized messages that are harmful. That will keep us from passing those messages on to our children, in the workplace, in life. If we think that people who belong to a certain group should act a certain way, we need to be really honest with ourselves about why we think that and be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with the people around us when we hear them doing it. When we hear somebody saying something that's paternalistic or sexist or just unfair at all, we need to be willing to say, like, why do you think that? Not even in a confrontational way, but just be willing to spark that conversation and maybe try to do some thoughtful education on the ground. Just be thoughtful about the way we talk to people.
This is turning into a playbook, ladies. Sophie, you want to add your take on that same question to you? Actionable steps for companies and individuals. We've gotten some really good bits so far.
Definitely. Yeah, those are fantastic actionable bits. And really, I think of it as things that are more legislative and then things that are more soft actionable. And one is a lot more measurable because it's the implementation of legislation, if you will. One of those that I personally think makes a massive impact that was touched upon by Cynthia around happy hour is understanding the gender roles at home and how, from a workplace perspective, you can support that. So, for example, paternal leave, I think that was actually called out in the report itself, but understanding a female may not have the same opportunity to go back to work because they have childcare duties, and being able to legislate and maybe partner, if you will, right? Any kind of partner support programs, or understanding, team bonding activities. When do those occur? Does that infringe on people's parental duties? What about remote work versus in person? How does that play in with childcare? And really being intentional about how you're building your culture around that consideration can make a massive, massive impact on the diversity that you're able to attract and also retain. And then if we go to more of the softer understanding and skill sets, it would be leaning into what Nycole just said around understanding everybody's got different rooted perspectives. I think about this as everyone's got a different book. Some of those pages are similar. Some of those pages are different. You may have an entire chapter that nobody else has any frame of reference to that is not in their book. And just being empathetic to understanding that everyone's got different pages and different stories, and being able to approach it as such. And so part of that is, one thing I've seen and really noted is we are a lot more likely to, as an organization here, or again, if some inbound that I receive, I am a lot more likely to receive that inbound from males, I've noted, than females. And that kind of ties back to a statistic around men are much more likely to apply for a position that they are not meeting all the requirements of, whereas women are less likely. I can't remember the exact percentage. But with that frame of reference and understanding, well, perhaps that ratio is actually skewed because of a behavior imbalance. And I need to be really intentional then about how I'm building and actually proactively go and create that balance. Because if I rely on the inbound and go forth as such, it's not going to be balanced. And understanding more of the deeper rooted kind of resonance behind that. So that's my personal use case, what I'm personally building around, but it applies to everything essentially that we're doing across all areas.
As we come to the end of time, I think that's a great place to wrap up. With less than a minute left, I'd invite everyone in the chat to think about one thing they heard today that they're actually going to go and do. One thing that you are going to roll in. In Wednesday Women, we talk about the ripple creating a wave. And we really hope that today's discussion was a ripple that will create a lot of waves. So maybe because we're close on time, we'll just see it all in the chat. But let's put in the chat what we are going to be doing. And I'd love to actually end the session with one more quick tidbit from Cynthia, because she has a 4-word phrase that we haven't actually touched on yet. And it's something that I have been living by more and more every day. Cynthia, would you end us on this high note of just sharing your 4-word phrase with the group here before we wrap up?
Yes. So you know how women tend to deflect compliments. I love your earrings. Oh, these old things. I got them at Target on the clearance rack, right? So in Uganda, women accept compliments by simply saying, thank you, it's true. No panic downplaying, just simple ownership. Thank you, it's true has the power to undo generations of women playing small. Thank you, it's true acknowledges the compliment, validates the sender, and honors yourself. Thank you, it's true. Own your awesome.
And thank you to everyone who attended our session dialing in. Thank you most of all, first and foremost, to Kickstand and to Wednesday Women for bringing this research to light. And a warm, warm, warm thank you so much to all of you amazing ladies for joining us today and bringing your perspective to the data in this important conversation. To anyone who's listening, if you haven't already, please check out the full report. You can find it totally ungated on the Kickstand and Wednesday Women websites. And if you have any questions about the study, you can message either of those companies or probably any one of us on this call on LinkedIn. And of course, you can directly email Nycole at Nycole, that's Nycole at meetkickstand.com. She is our data queen. As we wrap up, our last commitment and ask to everyone here today is that we keep the conversation going. We say, thank you, it's true. We own our awesome. We listen to that second voice. And we push ourselves and our employers to take real steps toward closing the gap and elevating the women who are out there driving real revenue, kicking butt in executive roles, and making real impact every day. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks so much, y'all.